A study was done years ago in the United States by an American researcher where she decided to visit a number of schools, a huge number of schools. It's a large-scale research. And this research, she visited schools and spent time observing teachers and principals. You might tell me, what is new about researchers visiting schools? We've heard it so many times, that they go and spend so much time in classrooms observing teachers and principals, and quite often they tell us things that you guys as people who work in schools know about. And I have to say that researchers like myself and Dr. Mike sometimes can be very boring people and tell you nothing really. But what she did differently is she decided to focus on something different. She decided to focus on what kind of data teachers and principals collect in their daily school day, and then how do they collect them, what kind of data, how do they collect them, and then how do they use them. She published her research years after that, and she mentioned in her article that quite often many of those teachers and principals actually spend time collecting data about students' achievement, about students' performance, and they collect them from internal school assessment methods or from other types of internal school methods of collecting data. And they use them in lesson planning and school action plans and anything that the principal is looking at that time. What she mentioned in her article is those principals and teachers keep doing the same thing, collecting the same data, using the same method year after year. Quite often they end up with similar results. And what's happening is there are other things. They're not aware of other things happening in the school because they keep using the same methods. We're not telling you here, abandon your assessment. We all know that assessment is very important. But what we're saying here is sometimes we need other sources of data collected from other types of methods. This researcher said principals and teachers, and overall, not only those who participated in her sample, principals and teachers and all over the world need sources of interruptions and distractions every now and then. What she meant is sometimes we're very busy doing whatever we're used to, and we need something else. She illustrated this as a person or as a student sitting in a desk, studying so hard with lots of papers, looking at them, studying them, reading them, and all of that. And suddenly another person bring a bundle of paper and just throw them at the table. So this person will look at this new bundle and will say, there's lots of things that I wasn't aware of. All this stuff was happening in my school, and I was not aware of. So this is why international assessment are very important. I look at them at the sources of interruptions and distractions that sometimes we need every now and then, just to help us in really understanding: are we in the right track? Are we doing what we're supposed to do? International assessment are important not only for you guys; they're important for us first in KHDA because they help us in figuring out what we're doing with the schools in Dubai. Are we doing what we're supposed to do? Are we helping the schools, in the way that we're supposed to help them and providing them with the information they need? Sometimes we're not aware of it ourselves as an organization, and we need such methods to help us. Overall, countries participate in international assessment to help them in monitoring the quality of education. But in addition to that, as you know, in KHDA, we follow a transparent approach in sharing with you as much information we can, which we believe that they could help you. So we learn from such data we collect from international assessment, and when we share them with you, we believe that we empower schools in Dubai, and we help you to become our partners in monitoring the quality of education. Our story with international assessment in Dubai started TIMSS 2007, when we participated at that time in the first cycle of TIMSS. In 2009, we participated in PISA for the first time, and then 2 years ago, we participated in a joint cycle of TIMSS and PIRLS 2011. All of these reports, you'll find them in our website with comprehensive information about every assessment. What does it assess, what does it target, and what were Dubai's result in each one of them. So we're here to talk today about the last international assessment that we got the data and we shared
the school results with our schools. So we're here to talk about your data and your school report and how could it help you in using it in planning and so on. Just briefly, before we start, I'll share with you some information about what is TIMSS and what is PIRLS. TIMSS is the Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study. It helps us in figuring out that achievement levels in mathematics and science in grade 4 and grade 8. TIMSS is a study. It's not just a test that is given to the student. It's a study. It has a questionnaire for teachers, questionnaire for principal, and for the students. So it helps us in understanding what are the main factors that affected students' improvement and levels of performance in science and math. And PIRLS, on the other hand, focuses on reading. It's the progress in international reading and literacy study. Again, it's not only a test. It's a study that includes lots of questionnaires also. The difference here is in PIRLS, in addition to the teacher, the principal, and the student questionnaire, we have a questionnaire for parents as well. So in addition to collecting information about the literary experience at school, we also collect important information about the literacy experience at home and what kind of home factors or school factors affected a student performance. Of course, in addition to that, there's the tests that help us in figuring out student achievement and reading by the end of grade 4. Again, just briefly, if you have attended wPIRLS event before, we already have discussed this, I think, 4 times, so bear with me if you've heard it before. Our results in TIMSS and PIRLS 2011, the international average in both assessment is 500 points. In 2007, as I said, in 2011, we participated in TIMSS for the second time. So by that cycle, we are now able to measure our trends from 2007 and 2011. And what happened in 2007 is our students performed overall, Dubai average, our students performed in all the domains below the international average. But what we found out in 2011 that students improved in mathematics, 24 points in grade 4 and 17 points in grade 8. In science, as you can see, the figures is really very small, so we could say that there were no improvement in science. And reading, on the other hand, which is PIRLS, it was the first time that we participate in PIRLS, and our score was 476. Of course, this is Dubai overall average, which is really very important. But today we're going to be talking about your reports, which include your individual, the students who were selected in those 2 tests, and their individual average in both TIMSS and PIRLS. That's why such reports are very, as I said, are really very important because they provide you with information that you could use them. And first of all, in understanding students' achievement at key areas, in addition to the assessment that you keep doing in your school, this is another source of information to tell you what exactly is happening with your students. Such information could help you to inform your lesson planning and teaching for teachers, and we hope that they could help school leaders in planning better self-evaluation plans. Again, because this is a report based on international assessment, so it's a very important tool for you guys to use it to understand your student achievement compared to international benchmarks. All of these points are actually part of the inspection framework. So we hope that they could help you not only inspection, but in helping your students to achieve better in all these important key subjects. So now, these are the reports that we hope that you have received them, and if not, please let us know. And Dr. Mike now will continue.
Okay, so what we want to do in this session is just give you a bit of an overview of both TIMSS and PIRLS and try to show you some of the analysis that you can undertake for your own school using your own results when you receive them. Now, there are 2 sessions, and as Rabaa mentioned, they're different sessions. So in the second session, we'll be building on what we're doing here. We'll probably leave a lot of the questions to the second session as well, unless you have anything to do with the sort of structure of the assessment, which I'll cover today. So as Rabaa mentioned, these are generally, international assessments are generally studies of systems and how systems perform. but we found that they're most useful when schools can take those results and see how their students perform. So the exact sample that was chosen in your school was a random sample of a particular classroom. And even though it was in 2011, we would want you to think of that as a baseline. So the 2011 results will be the first that you receive for your school. As I'll mention in this session, TIMSS has a particular feature that allows us to measure progress. So both TIMSS and PIRLS are scaled in a particular way that help you to get an external validation of how your students are performing according to these international assessments, and they have particular traits that make them very attractive to schools and teachers. So within the theme of what works, what these results help you to do is to identify what works, what has worked, what continues to work, for whom. Okay, so there are different students within your schools, and we recognize that. The TIMSS results also recognize that. So you'll notice that it not only gives you, for example, a single point score, which wouldn't be really very informative, it also gives you information on the range of abilities that you have within your school based on this assessment. Now, it's also important to bear in mind the circumstances. So TIMSS and PIRLS are international studies, and in the most recent round, we had 67 countries participate. So not only do you have a benchmark to compare to, that's the obvious one, the Dubai average or the Dubai trends, you can also look at trends for other schools teaching the same curricula as your school. You can also look at the 67 other systems that participated in this assessment. So there are international reports that cover the results of all systems, and in the KHDA report on the KHDA website you can see how each of these systems performed, and perhaps you can think of which system does your school most resemble or aspire to become like, and you can look at the different features of that system and how its results relate to that. So what I want to spend a bit of time on today is just to help you understand how TIMSS and PIRLS assess knowledge of students at grade 4 and grade 8. Before you start to look at your results, it's always important to understand the framework within which they're measured. So in PIRLS, we're going to consider two constructs of reading knowledge. And they relate to two distinct but equally important questions. The first is the question of how we read. Okay, so it's a question about the process of reading. And the second one is why we read, the purpose behind reading. And we expect our students to have a mixture of both. We want them to be conscious of the process of reading, to have a strategy when they approach reading, but we also want to see that they can read texts for different purposes. So that's why you'll see in PIRLS, when you receive your school results, that's going to be the split along which results are reported. So in the purpose domains, we're going to be interested in two equal dimensions. One of those is whether students can acquire information, just whether they can use information. And the other half of the reading purposes is reading for enjoyment. Okay, reading for a literary experience, and that's about whether your students have the skills and the knowledge to just be able to pick up a text that's probably not familiar to them and read that and recognize the sort of beautiful elements of the text or find parts of it that are enjoyable to them. Now, where most teachers or most instruction in languages is organized is around the processes of comprehension, perhaps. And you can see there are 4 parts there, but the results that you'll receive will be classified in 2. The left side of that diagram and the right side. So you'll see that there's 50% of the comprehension result that focuses on students' ability to extract information from a text. And so 20% is on the explicit information, so if they can go through a text and just deduce what's obvious from it, and another 30% is on straightforward inferences. So this is a single step higher in terms of orders of thinking than extracting explicit information, but it's still not requiring higher order skills in that it's just thinking about inferences that they can make from obvious elements in the text. Now, the remaining 50% does focus on higher order skills. So about 20% of this is on students' ability to critically reflect on their own process of reading. Are they able to evaluate how they approach reading, but also to evaluate different parts of the text? Do they understand why authors use certain strategies at different parts? Now, the remainder of that half of the process is dedicated to students' ability to integrate information. So when we think about reading, we think of this transferable skill that allows you to pick up bits of information from different parts and integrate that into one complete picture of knowledge. And that's what PIRLS is trying to assess. So 30% of that is trying to evaluate students' ability to integrate information from different parts of the text. Why is this necessary? Now, of course, we mentioned that this helps you understand your results. So when you look at your school results, this is something that you should bear in the back of your mind, that these are the types of allocation or weightings that are allocated to each area in reading, math, and science. And we'll show you those two in a moment. So they may interpret why your results in TIMSS and PIRLS might be different to other data sets or other sources of information around student achievement that you've seen. The way this configuration is devised is through a panel of experts across most countries that participate in TIMSS and PIRLS. So the UAE was encouraged to nominate someone. Every country that participates in TIMSS and PIRLS nominates someone to review the framework of this assessment to make sure that it aligns with the type of instruction that goes on within schools. So very often we get asked the question, which curriculum is this based on? In reality, if you look at the results across all countries, at least 90% of questions in TIMSS are thought to be common across all 67 countries that participate. So there's really not so much in there about the curriculum, because these international expert panels have been able to establish a common ground at grade 4 and grade 8 that we think most students should have. So when you're considering how you might be able to improve reading, think about this split. Is this the way that you organize your instruction in your school? Is this the way you organize assessment at your school? So this is how PIRLS assesses reading, and this may explain why your results look like the way they do. So in a similar fashion, we can get the breakdown in maths and science along two constructs. One of those is the content domain, and this again perhaps is the easiest for teachers to comprehend, because this is how we organize a lot of our teaching. So the content domain looks at the subject matter. And in maths, we know that at the 4th grade, that includes number, geometric shapes, and data display. Now you'll see there that there's obviously a different focus in grade 4 compared to grade 8. So as we move to older grade levels, there's a greater degree of specialization. We know that from the teachers. We also know that from much of the material that's taught across curricula in Dubai and also the rest of the world. So you see that there's a shift from a focus of around 50% on number at the grade 4 level to number only taking up 30% in equal proportions to algebra. And then the remaining percentage is split between geometry and data and chance as 40%. Now, one thing we want you to also think about is whether this is how your teachers approach mathematical instruction. So at the grade 4 or grade 8 level, what proportion of time is dedicated to algebra, geometry, data and chance, or number? That might explain some of the results that you see. And we see, for example, in a lot of the research around the world, we find that teachers tend to gravitate towards teaching number at the grade 4 and grade 8 level. It's much more comfortable to teach that. It's probably one of the easier content domains to focus on. And we see a lot less focus on geometric shapes or data display and data and chance, which are very important in determining mathematical knowledge, as I'll show you. So related to the content domains are the cognitive areas. Now these are cognitive areas that we think students should have regardless of the content that we are teaching. So students should have some level of skill in knowing, applying, and reasoning, whether we're teaching them algebra, number, geometry, data, and chance, or any other content area. So these domains, these cognitive domains, if you like, map across all of our content domains that we have in both math and science. Again, you see a different trend for grade 4 than it is for grade 8. So at the grade 4 level, there's a great focus on knowing. And certainly that's backed by pedagogical research that finds that we need to start from an early age in terms of building a strong factual base for students, especially in math and science. So you'll see 40% of the assessment at grade 4 is on knowing. Okay? Now, as we move up to grade 8, that goes down to 35%. And in mathematics, at least, we move from 20% focus on reasoning to a quarter, 25% at the grade 8 level. So when you look at the different TIMSS questions later on today, you'll be able to see how these questions perhaps differ from general assessments. They also have the particular trait of being able to give you your students' results based on this breakdown. So you will not only see one result for maths, but you'll be able to see 3 content domain areas at the grade 4 level, 4 at the grade 8, and you'll also be able to see 3 cognitive skills at grade 4 and grade 8. And that really helps you identify the areas of strength for your students, and to also try to figure out, you know, what are the areas that we would like to improve? What are some of the areas that we should target, perhaps in our instruction when thinking about future rounds? So, we've just listed these here, and there's more that you can look at in the reports, either the KHDA report or the school report. So I won't spend too much time on this, but just so that you know, these are broken down further into detailed topics. So you can look at each content domain area and identify topics within those content domains. Similarly, for cognitive skill areas, you can also identify, you know, how the IEA or the expert panel that sets these questions regards knowing. Okay, what do we mean by applying? What exactly is being assessed under reasoning? And for all of these, you can find examples as well in many IEA resources that we'll talk about in the second session. But what I want to show you in science is also a very distinct point being made by those who set science questions in the transition from grade 4 to grade 8. So again, at the grade 4 level, our findings show that most systems around the world have just one teacher of science at the grade 4 level. That's generally a generalist science teacher. And as you move to grade 8, most systems tend to have 3 or more science teachers for the same grade level. Obviously, there's greater specialization. There's a greater level of training and knowledge that's expected of teachers at grade 8. So what you see there is that life science at the grade 4 level takes up around 45%, and that moves to, at the grade 8 level, biology is still the most important, but we have other domains that we're interested in analyzing. So, for example, chemistry and physics are explicitly stated, and earth science takes up another 20% as it does in grade 4. So think about your science instruction. For your school here in Dubai, for schools or for systems that you aspire to match or to achieve similar results to, this is the type of split that experts see as appropriate, as suitable for typical grade 4 and grade 8 students. And now this might not align with how you organize your instruction. The kind of default reaction is just to say, okay, that's easy, that explains our results. We just dedicate a different proportion of time to these areas. Now, whether or not you want to settle with that explanation is probably up to you, but generally the type of expert teams that organize these assessments, there's general convergence in many systems around the world to regard this as very much the gold standard, or the standard of how instruction should be organized. So these studies have been externally validated in many occasions. Students have been tracked as they move forward from TIMSS. We know that students who score higher in TIMSS end up having better life outcomes later on. So these scores are more than just indicators on a test, and this type of breakdown is more than just someone's opinion of how tests should be organized. They're all research driven and continue to be tested and evaluated with each round. So they've changed over time and haven't always looked like that. Cognitive domains in science is just one last point I want to make in this area. Whereas in grade 4, we regard knowing to be probably the most important cognitive skill that students should have in science, that's going to be completely reversed at the grade 8 level. So knowing is going to move from being the single sort of most important, or the domain that gets the greatest allocation at the grade 4 level, to the one that gets the least level of attention at the grade 8 level. So we are expecting our students in science to move from knowing in grade 4 over to applying and reasoning, and much more so on the reasoning side. Now, it probably isn't a big secret to you that results in reasoning tend to be lower. Okay, most schools across the world, most systems, most curricula across the world tend to score better in the knowing side. And this describes the sort of shift in from traditional pedagogy to more modern forms. And this is where we see the education, research and practice moving from a focus on knowing at lower grade levels to more applying and reasoning. And we'll show you some examples of that later on. So as with maths, you get to see particular detailed topics under each of these domains. One other thing that we'll mention later on today is that within the IEA resources are types of questions. So with each assessment, questions are released or made public to countries or participants in TIMSS. And that means that since 1995, the first round of this assessment, you really have access to a great many different types of questions since that assessment. So if you're looking for resources in order to be able to look at what type of question is asked in TIMSS, we're not saying that you should sort of use that for coaching purposes or teaching students to the test. But if you're looking at different ways, if you're trying to introduce some sort of professional development around different question types, then you can do that with TIMSS, and we'll show you examples of those in the second session. Now, in Dubai, I think the exceptional feature of TIMSS and PIRLS in 2011 was its coverage. So what was different in Dubai compared to other systems that participate is that all eligible schools sat for this assessment. So in 2011, every school that could, by the design of the assessment, sit for this assessment was actually sampled. And that means that there's a very comprehensive picture of student performance or knowledge and skills across all students. So you might think to yourself, you know, it was one class or only a set of 30 students, but the way in which the sample is designed is scientifically chosen so that it represents the system, it represents the school at a certain point in time. And so when you reflect back on that, think about the changes that have occurred in your school since 2011. Because as you can see from there, all curricula were represented in the same way that they are split in real life. So this is the sample of TIMSS and PIRLS in 2011, and you can see that schools from all different types of curricula were selected. And before we talk about the results, I just want to make a quick point about the scale that we're going to use. Again, one of the advantages of both TIMSS and PIRLS is that they're linked over time. So perhaps unlike a school-based assessment, where in a school-based assessment, it's probably very difficult to maintain the same level of difficulty each year. We try to do that. We see examples of teachers trying to keep a similar level of difficulty year on year. That doesn't always succeed, naturally. Now, with these tests, from the thousands of questions that are available, there are actual linked questions. So there are linked questions between each assessment round, and that enables us to truly measure progress. So a higher result in a subsequent round of TIMSS, so if your school has a higher result, a significantly higher result in the next round in TIMSS 2014, that means real improvement. That means your students' level of knowledge and skills has increased in a substantial way compared to 2007. We can't always say that about other assessments, okay? It might have been a particularly easier year, for example, or marking could have been different in a particular year in other assessments. So that's one advantage of TIMSS. Now, when you think about the results and you look at your school's results, consider the 500 average. That is a scaled average that represents all countries that participated in the first round of TIMSS, and it's something that most systems around the world aspire to. So it's not a low bar in any sense. It's called a scale average, but that doesn't mean that it's just average. If you're at the 500, you're actually at a very good point. And I just want to show you quickly why that is the case. What we'll talk about in the next session today are benchmarks. So as I mentioned earlier, it's probably not very useful to you if you walk away from today thinking, okay, our school scored 419 points. That probably doesn't mean anything, okay? And in terms of trying to understand or relate those to actual teaching and learning that occurs, that's not going to be very helpful. Now, what the IEA has done is that each of these scores map to a particular benchmark. So there are ranges of scores that correspond to benchmarks on both assessments, and they go from below low to the advanced, where we're going to be very concerned about students in the below low category. they are students who show a critically low level of knowledge and skills that places them at risk of generally not being able to gain meaningful employment, not being able to have a lifestyle that sees them support themselves in the current economy. So that's something that we're going to be really concerned with. Above the high benchmark, so from high and above, high and advanced, we're considering students in the top 5% of the world. Okay, so the advantage of TIMSS is, in addition to a point score, you'll see a score for your students, but what you'll also see is a distribution along these benchmarks. So that's something that we advocate doing two things with. The first is to better understand your results, because we're often not just interested in the average. That's sort of a meaningful point, but not sufficient, because within your school there could be great variation. So we'd encourage you to think about the variation in your school by looking at these benchmarks. And these benchmarks aren't just labels. Underneath each benchmark, and we'll talk about that in the next session, are specific skills. So we can see for students at the low level what they can do. And by looking at that, we can look at the higher level, and that means that these students cannot do what students at a higher level can do. So these are the what I'm trying to imply there is the next benefit of benchmarks is for planning. So when your school picks up its report and tries to think about where we want to get to 4 years after the initial assessment, 3 years after today, you're going to have a tool there which looks at the distribution of your students across these benchmarks. So rather than target a specific score point, which is often quite difficult because it's very hard to hit these score points, and generally they're measured with some error so that your school score is more a range than a specific point. But rather than target that point or range in the future, it's a much better idea to target benchmarks. So we find that schools are able to plan better when they look at these benchmarks, understand the skills under each of these benchmarks, and then say, okay, our plan is to reduce the proportion of students who are below low to a certain point by the next assessment round. Our plan is to increase the proportion of students who are high or advanced to a certain level by the next round, rather than target a particular score level. So that's just a very important point that I want to make before we talk about the actual school results. Now, we do have, we've run into the end of the session, so what we're going to do is just take any questions that you have about the design of these assessments, and we thought it was worth spending some time making sure that we all understand the design of the assessment before we talk about the results. In the next session, we'll be going through question types. So you can look at real test items from TIMSS and PIRLS. You'll also be able to see the distribution of results for Dubai, so as something that you can compare to. We'll walk you through the type of analysis that we would encourage you to undertake when you get your school reports, and then we'll demonstrate what you can do with the actual school reports. Now, as Rabaa mentioned, if you haven't yet received the reports, it's very important that you leave the email of someone at the school who can receive these results. Make sure you see someone from KHDA before you leave this session, just to ensure that you receive your school results. And if you have any questions, we'll take some questions now and also follow them up at the end of the second session. Yes?
Talking about external assessment, I see TIMSS and PIRLS being used in different countries. Data analysis, implementation of the action plan is very good. But is there any correlation study between TIMSS, PIRLS compared to other international tests, taking, for example, Michigan test, MPT, or Iowa test, or ACER? Is that any correlation study that can translate that 474 English, for example, to a TOEFL, IELTS, or other external assessment? Thank you.
So that's a very good question. And so one feature of these international assessments is they were all born out of this framework. So any of the assessments that you mentioned are all coming from the same school of thought around the need to have standardized assessments in this space. Now, in relation to your specific question, rather than mapping specific score points, what has become increasingly available these days are the mapping of the benchmarks. So you can see the skill level under each benchmark, and you can relate that to other assessments. So all of these assessments have rubrics. So it's fairly straightforward to compare the rubrics of both. Now, with some very common types of international assessments, that link has already been done. So you can find resources that are accessible, and you can straight away see what each number corresponds to. But if you have an assessment that's, that hasn't had that type of linkage already occur, then I would recommend looking at the benchmarks, because the benchmarks have very clear standards or criteria and reference for each level. And so you can see, you know, based on any other type of assessment, what your students can do in kind of a qualitative sense, what it says that your students can do, and try to compare that to TIMSS. There's very strong correlation. The reason why this has become the most commonly used test, TIMSS, PIRLS, and PISA for older students, is because of its predictive power. So students who do well on TIMSS and PIRLS have been shown to have all sorts of better outcomes in their life compared to those who don't do as well.
I do agree to a certain point. For example, this year we received the TIMSS and PIRLS results. I'm looking, and I've taken ACER exams in October, which I received the full results, and I'm looking at the analysis part of it, and it's completely, I don't know, it's a big challenge. I do understand from, you know, Bloom's taxonomy, from test building strategies, from knowledge analyzing. I do understand content coverage. For example, in math in grade 4, we're talking about numbers. Can you count from 1 to 20? In science, for example, in grade 8, can you know a bit of, you know, basic chemistry? I do understand. But you look at the result, and I'm struggling, because I look at TIMSS and PIRLS, and it's something, and I go back to ACER, which is the Australian Center for Research. I'm completely in limbo and the question mark. So this is what I'm asking you the same question.
Right, and there's no reason why you should use one type of assessment. I'm sure if you go back to the assessment design, the very purpose of these assessments are different. And so bearing that in mind, you can use both of those results. So where the ACER test or any other test addresses particular points, those may not be covered in TIMSS and PIRLS, or vice versa. So as you say, if they form conflicting pictures, that's much less to do with the test design as it is with what they're out to measure to begin with. It's not about, you know, the fact that one is more superior than the other, or that it's a better quality test, but what they are measuring might be different. Is something that we would sort of, I mean, that's what we see in that sense.
I'm more looking at the validity.
Right, right.
Because when we use, for example, ACER, analyzing all these results, for me, it's action plan. For instance, in science, I can find in grade 4, my students are probably better doing in general science than, you know, very specific. Then my action plan is adjusting the lesson plan, you know, talking time, intro, all that stuff, and CPD, of course, the training. What is a little bit questionable here is when you see the analysis is a bit different, but we do know that in grade 4, we need to cover 35% of basic science, for example. Is that correct? This is very internationally, but the results are, and using diverse external assessment like TIMSS, PIRLS, Michigan, Iowa, ACER, it's good, but where do I go? Thank you.
Right, and I think just to answer that point is, this is the first time that TIMSS or PIRLS results have been shared with schools. So, you know, that report could have been 10 times the length of what you received with all the sort of analysis that underlies it. But we realize that there's a different level of understanding of international assessments across schools, different uses. That doesn't mean you shouldn't look at the school report as the be-all and end-all of you know, what you should do with TIMSS. You should take it as a starting point, as a point of departure for you to undertake even further analysis. We'll point you to certain resources in the second session that you can then extend for your teaching staff. And you don't just have to regard the sort of TIMSS school report as the complete summary of everything you need to know from TIMSS and PIRLS. Yes? I'm sorry, can we just get the question?
Hi, sir. Good afternoon. My concern is regarding when I check our result. Of course, it's not ideal for us. By the way, I'm coming from a Philippine curriculum. Now, the content of the test, when I check, for grade 8, it's biology, chemistry, physics, and earth science. And taking that test, grade 8 for us is only biology. And of course, the earth science for first year, so grade 7. Now, this chemistry and physics is for grade 9 and 10. Maybe that's one of the reasons why even in ACER, I mean, the result of the exam is not that ideal, which I explained also to the KHDA visitors. Now, maybe a suggestion. What do you think? Do we need to what to include? Because if that will be the basis, of course, we want to uplift the standard of Philippine curriculum. But if we will base it in our curriculum, this chemistry and physics, not for grade 8, it's for grade 9 and 10.
So I can answer that question from an assessment point of view and probably leave Rabaa to talk about the other side of it, the KHDA and inspection side. But there are two things to note. The first is that this is how most education today is organized in many systems. Now, if you're saying that we will cover the same type of content, the same type of cognitive skills at a later stage, then some countries, in some systems, actually participate in TIMSS at later grade levels. So for example, some countries took TIMSS in grade 6 and grade 10. Okay, so because they recognize that it's not a matter of us never covering these areas, it's just a timing issue. Or that we think our system is moving towards covering these issues at grade 4 and grade 8, but we're just not there yet. We think right now they're still at grade 6. So, that's one way in which you can think about some, a way of evaluating whether that's the only case, okay? Because that might be one factor amongst many, the sort of, the way in which, or the timing in which that's organized. But you did raise there that, for example, we focus on biology. So then my sort of deduction from there is then your biology results on TIMSS should be very high. And so that's something to think about, right? Because, compare the test design to what your stated focus is and to what you observe in your school. And that's a way to interpret the results. So part of it might be alignment, and I'm sure some of it will be. But another part could just be that, students might need to improve particular aspects that are already covered in the assessment.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
What I would like to say is, as Dr. Mike says, this is the first time that we shared with the school the TIMSS report. And the amount of information that we receive from TIMSS databases, they're phenomenal. There's lots of data, and we spent 4 months, I don't know, just deciding. I mean, the first question we ask ourselves, what do we give our schools? There's lots of things, and sometimes it's very difficult to decide what to give your school, because the Philippine curriculum school will need different kind of information, whereas American school will need something else. And we really want you to work with us with these reports. We want you to try to use them and let us know what are the things that are really helping you, what are things that are not helping you. We advise you to go to our website and check out the TIMSS and PIRLS Dubai's report, and there are lots of information there about the questionnaires and the background information. There are lots of things that we can get from TIMSS and PIRLS background questionnaires that they're really very difficult to get from other places. And sooner or later, we'll have also PISA 2012 result, and this is a different assessment with a different scale and kind of thing. So we try to share with you as much as information that we can, and we hope that they help you, but please try to use them and let us know. This is helping us, this is not helping us. Please, can you add more? Can we get this type of information? Such kind of feedback when we get from school would really help us to plan other, our future international assessment projects. And when it comes to the curriculum, as Dr. Mike said, it will be interesting for you to, check your biology result. Are you doing well in biology as you expect? And I have to say, in PIRLS, the Philippine curriculum score really very good comparing to other curricula. So look at the different international assessment and think about what kind of information you can get from this one, but not necessarily from the other one. And we hope they help you, and please get back to us. I don't have our email here, but it's internationalassessments@khda.gov.ae. Please feel free to email us and share with us any ideas that you have.
Just one thing I wanted to ask you all. Do we need, now we are into 2013.
Yes.
What report we are getting is for 2011. Students have changed, things have changed. So how do we base our action plans based on that? Is it correct? It's a base, see, it's a base, but it's 2 years back, 2 academic years back. And you can't we get the results a little earlier?
Yeah, well, we have, these international assessments are major projects that we, 4 years, 5 years sometimes, now we're starting to work on TIMSS and PISA 2015. And we're gonna get the result by 2016. Because it's an international assessment, it's run by international organizations. There are more than 90 countries that participate with us. So by the moment that we get result, it's already 1 year after the assessment. And for us to analyze them and report on them, this also takes time. So we're actually hoping that you use them as indicators, things that tell you what are happening in your school. And once we have more data, then we'll start also providing you with more trends analysis, so you can compare the performance from your students from one cycle to another cycle. The reason that we didn't do in this report in TIMSS 2011, that in 2007, not all of the schools in Dubai participated, but in 2011, all of the schools participated. So starting from the next cycle, you'll have more trend analysis. So we hope that they help you as indicators, as things to show you what are areas of strength and weaknesses. But I understand your concern, and we had that concern ourselves. But this is how international assessment are run.
And just to follow up, I mean, that's a complete answer, but just to say that with these studies, there's sort of an assumption that in 2 years, there generally isn't a massive transformation or a complete overhaul of most systems. If that has occurred, then factor that into your planning. What do you think you've done to target the areas that are mentioned in your report, or maybe you have overlooked some of these areas. So, in the meantime, while we're sort of waiting for that trend, it's still useful to look at the 2011 results.
By the way, I think the Philippine government Ministry of Education, they're revamping the curriculum for next year, just to let you know. Okay, okay, thank you. A question here, I've watched these TIMSS and PIRLS in different countries, and I myself worked in Japan with the Ministry of Education, in South Korea, in Singapore, and I've seen always 4 leading countries. Honestly speaking, if it's not Singapore, it's South Korea. If it's not South Korea, Japan. We know this, right? Now, I've worked with the government Ministry of Education in South Korea for 8 years. And I can tell you 90% the teaching methodology is very traditional. Size class is 40, and it's chalk and talk. Now, I take this first to my school, from my private school, by the way, and I'll take it for an action plan to improve. Okay, I do have traditional teachers. I do have teachers that are very interactive with kids. How would you explain that? Thank you.
Sure. And I guess, I mean, the easy response to that is if you look at the systems that have traditionally been thought of as model systems, or systems that other countries have tried to replicate, they're not interested in competing or replacing Singapore, Shanghai, Hong Kong at the top end of those tables, because in many cases they understand what is required to reach those levels. So that's not to say that all of it is rote learning or factual, just based on the knowing side. But the answer to that is firstly you can look at applying and reasoning, because those are just sort of by definition and design, you can target increasing those aspects which are not on the traditional side of how we perceive things. But the other point is, in many cases, Shanghai, for example, I know this isn't the TIMSS and PIRLS, but in PISA, surprised many in 2009. Now, although there were issues around the sample that was chosen, etc., but there still is a form of modernization in education occurring in these countries. Now, although the overwhelming picture of education tends to be traditional and is test-based, there are some movements of improvement. So, even if you look at their applying or reasoning results, in some cases, you see that they're equally high. Definitely not as high as knowing. That's probably the area that they excel in the most. But yeah, so the answer to that, I suppose, is thinking about what your targets are. It may not necessarily be to try to reach that top of that table, but there's probably no reason why that can't be the case in reasoning or applying. Thinking about having ambitions to reach world standards in applying and reasoning is certainly not sort of a traditional view.
just want to go back to the same example that we used with the Philippine school, and this is the purpose of the report, is for you to really read it and identify the areas that need targeting, the areas that maybe you're doing very well. Probably their school might not be doing very well in science, but there are 2 Philippines schools in Dubai, and their average was I don't remember it exactly, but in PIRLS, in reading, it was around 497, something like that. It's a huge number, it's a big figure. That means you're really doing something very special in reading. The story might not be the same in science, but it's for you to look at the different areas and try to ask yourself, what are the things that you're doing very well, the things that you might not be doing very well and need more, planning and improvement.
Thank you so much.